I am Thomas, 70 years old, and somehow still healing from the wounds my own family inflicted. As a retired structural engineer, I spent my life building strong foundations, completely unaware that my own son was plotting a fatal collapse. 5 months after my wife died, I took her broken smart glasses in for a simple repair. The technician locked his shop doors, pulled me into a back room, and whispered, "Check the will right now before you are next." I stood frozen, watching the terrifying video he recovered from her glasses. And in that dark room, my grief turned into a cold, calculated plan for revenge. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Now, let me tell you how a simple errand uncovered a nightmare. For 40 years, I worked in Chicago building things meant to last. I understand stress fractures, load-bearing walls, and the invisible forces that cause a structure to collapse. I always believed my family was built on solid bedrock. I provided everything for my wife Martha and our son Derek. I paid for his Ivy League education, funded his lavish wedding to his wife Rachel, and stepped back to enjoy my retirement, trusting that my legacy was secure. 5 months ago, that foundation cracked. Martha passed away. The doctors called it a sudden and massive heart attack. It happened on a Tuesday evening while I was downtown at a charity board meeting. By the time I rushed back to our house, the paramedics were already shaking their heads. Derek and Rachel had been visiting her that evening. They told me she just collapsed clutching her chest and that it happened too fast for anyone to do anything. I accepted it. Death is the one structural failure no engineer can calculate or prevent. But Martha had been struggling before she died. She was in the early stages of memory loss. She would forget her keys, lose her way on her morning walks, and get frustrated with the fading reliability of her own mind. To help her maintain her independence, I bought her a pair of custom smart glasses. They looked like ordinary designer frames, but they had a discreet built-in camera. It was designed to record her daily routes and sync to a private cloud, so if she ever got lost, she could literally retrace her steps. The paramedics had handed me her personal items in a plastic bag that night. Her wedding ring, her watch, and those glasses. The right lens was cracked from where she hit the floor. I could not bring myself to look at them for months. The grief was too heavy, a suffocating weight that made me avoid anything that reminded me of her absence. Yesterday morning, I finally found the strength to open that plastic bag. I decided I wanted the glasses fixed to keep them as a memento. I drove to a small tech repair shop owned by Leo Mitchell. Leo is a brilliant kid, a software wizard I had known since he was a teenager. I helped pay for his college tuition when his own father walked out on him, and he always treated Martha and me like family. The bell above the door chimed as I walked into the dusty electronics fill shop. Leo looked up from his workbench and smiled. I handed him the glasses and explained that I just wanted the cracked lens replaced and the internal memory wiped clean so I could safely store them away. I expected him to take them, give me a receipt, and tell me to come back tomorrow. Instead, the moment Leo recognized the specific serial number on the smart frames, his entire demeanor changed. The smile vanished from his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. He looked past me, staring out the front window of the shop as if checking to see if anyone had followed me. Without saying a single word, Leo walked past me, flipped the open sign to closed, pulled the heavy security blinds down over the glass, and turned the deadbolt. A loud, heavy click echoed in the quiet shop. "What is going on, Leo?" I asked, my voice tight with confusion. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me toward the back room where he kept his secure servers. He shut the door behind us, plunging the small room into shadows, illuminated only by the glow of his computer monitors. He looked at me, his hands physically trembling as he held Martha's glasses. "Mr. Caldwell," he whispered, his voice shaking, "you need to check your wife's will right now before you are next." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Before I am next," I asked, "what does that mean? What are you talking about?" Leo did not answer. He sat down at his terminal, plugged a specialized decryption cable into the hidden port on the glasses, and began typing furiously. He explained that a few weeks after Martha died, he had run a routine diagnostic sweep on his cloud servers, the servers that hosted the backup data for her glasses. He had noticed a massive anomaly. A huge file corruption occurred right around the exact time of her death. Someone had tried to remotely wipe the glasses and the cloud backup simultaneously, but they were sloppy. They did not know Leo had built a shadow directory into the hardware for emergency recovery. I froze as he hit the enter key. A progress bar flashed on the screen, piecing together shattered fragments of data. I managed to reconstruct the raw video file from the physical memory cache inside the frames. Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. I did not know what to do. I have been terrified to call you. I did not know who to trust. Just watch. The screen flickered to life. It was a first-person perspective recorded directly from the camera resting on the bridge of Martha's nose. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the exact date and time of her death. The video was shaky, but the resolution was clear. I was looking through my dead wife's eyes. She was in our kitchen. I saw her hands frail and trembling, reaching out toward the marble countertop. I heard her breath, ragged and shallow, struggling to pull air into her lungs. It was the terrifying sound of a woman experiencing acute heart failure. The camera angle shifted violently downward as Martha collapsed to the hardwood floor. The impact cracked the lens, leaving a jagged spiderweb fracture across the left side of the screen. Through that fractured view, two pairs of shoes stepped into the frame, the expensive polished Italian leather loafers and a pair of designer heels. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. Standing directly over my dying wife were my son Derek and his wife Rachel. They were not panicking. They were not reaching for their phones to call for an ambulance. They were not kneeling down to help her. They were just standing there looking down at her with an absolute terrifying calmness. Martha let out a desperate wheezing gasp. Her hand reached up weakly, pointing toward the counter. Her voice was faint, agonizing to listen. To the medicine, she whispered. My pills. Rachel stepped forward. Her pristine manicured hand reached out and picked up the small orange prescription bottle of Martha's emergency heart medication from the counter. I watched, paralyzed by a sickening horror as Rachel unscrewed the cap, looked down at my gasping wife, and simply turned away, keeping the pills completely out of reach. Derek crouched down. His face filled the camera's view. My own son, the boy I had raised and protected, looking into his dying mother's eyes with a cold, empty stare. He leaned in close, his lips parted as if he was about to speak. But before he could say a word, the video violently stuttered. The image scrambled into a chaotic mess of digital noise and static, and the screen went completely black. I stood there in the dark room, my lungs burning. I had stopped breathing. The silence in the repair shop was deafening, broken only by the hum of the computer servers. It cuts out right there, Leo whispered, breaking the silence. The impact from the fall damaged the internal drive, and whoever tried to wipe the data corrupted the audio in the final seconds. The encryption is incredibly deep. I have been running algorithms for weeks, but I need more time to recover the rest of the file and clean up the audio so we can hear exactly what he said. My mind was a chaotic storm. The structural integrity of my entire reality had just been obliterated. My wife did not just die of a heart attack. She was murdered by our own son and his wife. They stood there and watched her suffocate deliberately, withholding the medication that would have saved her life. And now they were pretending to mourn her. Why, I thought my fists clenching so hard my knuckles turned white. Why would they do this? Check the will. Leo had said before you are next. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the tension in the room. I jumped, pulling it from my pocket. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim light. It was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen, the name of the man who had stood over my dying wife. My thumb hovered over the accept button. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the violent rage down into a cold, locked box inside my mind. I answered the call and brought the phone to my ear. "Hey, Dad." Derek's voice echoed through the speaker. It was sickeningly sweet, laced with that fake practiced warmth he used with his clients. "Rachel and I are coming over to the house right now. We need to pick you up and take you to the lawyer to sign those power of attorney papers. Your memory is getting worse lately, Dad. You need us to step in and handle everything for you. See you in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could say a word. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with terrifying clarity. My son had killed his mother, and now he was coming for me. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The cold metal grounded me against the storm raging in my chest. I looked at Leo. The young man was pale, his eyes wide with fear. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder, letting him know I was in absolute control. "Keep working on decrypting the rest of that audio file," I told him, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Back up everything to a secure offline drive, and do not answer your phone for anyone but me. I will handle my son." I stepped out of the repair shop and into the brisk autumn air. I had exactly 15 minutes before they arrived. As a structural engineer, I had spent my entire 40-year career evaluating immense physical loads, calculating exactly how much relentless pressure a solid steel support beam could take before it finally snapped. I had to apply that exact same cold, unforgiving mathematics to my own mind right now. I could not let the crushing grief or the blinding fury show. I had to become the very thing they truly believed I was. A weak, confused, deeply grieving old man whose mind was steadily slipping away into the fog. I let my shoulders slump forward, completely altering my posture. I purposely slowed my breathing, making it shallow and slightly labored. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting a vacant, lost expression settle heavily over my features. Right on time, a sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The heavily tinted passenger window rolled down, revealing Derek in the driver's seat, gripping the hand-stitched leather steering wheel. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the wildly successful investment banker he portrayed to the world. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, turning to give me a bright, flawlessly practiced smile that made my stomach physically churn with absolute disgust. "Oh, Dad, we were so terribly worried about you." Rachel cooed quickly, opening her heavy car door and stepping out onto the pavement to gently help me inside. "Why are you walking around this busy part of town all by yourself? You know, you get easily disoriented these days." I let my hands tremble slightly as I reached out to take her offered arm. "I was just getting your mother's glasses fixed," I mumbled deliberately, slurring my words just a fraction to properly sell the performance. "I thought maybe she would want them back." Rachel exchanged a quick, highly revealing look with Derek, a look that clearly screamed, "The old man is rapidly losing his mind." She gently guided me into the spacious back seat, treating me like a fragile piece of antique glass that was already cracking under the immense pressure. Derek pulled the massive SUV away from the curb, seamlessly merging into the heavy afternoon traffic. He adjusted his rear-view mirror just enough so he could make direct eye contact with me while he drove. He had always been a remarkably smooth talker, an absolute master at selling highly toxic financial assets to wealthy clients who simply did not know any better. Now, he was ruthlessly applying those exact same boardroom manipulation tactics to his own father. "Dad, we really need to sit down and talk seriously about the future." Derek began, his tone dripping with manufactured concern. "I was reviewing the estate documents this morning with the legal team. Mom's final medical bills are incredibly complicated. The hospital is sending massive invoices that do not make any sense, and the insurance company is giving us the runaround. It is rapidly becoming a massive administrative headache for everyone involved." I stared aimlessly out the tinted window, carefully keeping my expression entirely blank and unresponsive. "Bills," I whispered, sounding incredibly distant and thoroughly confused. "I can just write a check, Derek. We have plenty of money in the accounts. We do not need to worry about paying medical bills. That is exactly the root of the problem." Dad Dirk said smoothly, casually tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. You have $40 million sitting in various trust accounts, real estate properties, and liquid assets. It is a massive, highly complex portfolio. But without Mom here to legally co-manage things, the imminent tax liabilities are going to be absolutely disastrous. And honestly, Dad, Rachel, and I are getting deeply worried about you living all alone in that big house. Worried about me? I asked, letting a pathetic note of feeble confusion perfectly enter my fragile voice. Rachel turned around completely in her seat, resting her perfectly manicured hand affectionately on my knee. Yes, Thomas? She said softly. Her voice was like smooth velvet draped over shattered glass. You have not been yourself since Martha passed away. You are constantly forgetting things. You wander off without telling anyone. The intense grief is taking a terrible visible toll on your cognitive health. We just want to protect you. There are so many ruthless scammers out there who specifically prey on vulnerable seniors with large unprotected estates. We simply cannot bear the thought of someone taking advantage of you when you are this fragile. The breathtaking hypocrisy of her empty words almost made me completely break character. They were the ruthless scammers. They were the absolute predators hiding in this vehicle. But I simply nodded slowly, looking down at my visibly trembling hands. What do you want me to do? I asked quietly, perfectly playing the tragic role of the defeated victim. It is very simple, Dad, Derek replied instantly, his voice brightening with a wave of false relief. We are heading to the lawyer's office right now to have you sign a comprehensive power of attorney document. It just gives me the legal authority to seamlessly handle all the complex financial matters properly, manage the various trusts, and deal with the endless hospital billing departments. You will not have to worry about a single difficult thing ever again. You can just rest peacefully at home and focus entirely on your physical health. We will carry the heavy burden for you. It was a brilliantly constructed, absolutely flawless lie. To any outside observer, they would look exactly like the perfect, deeply devoted family, gracefully stepping up to lovingly care for an ailing, grieving patriarch. But I knew exactly what that binding legal document truly was. It was a blank check. The very moment my signature hit that specific piece of paper, Derek would immediately have unrestricted, unquestioned access to legally liquidate every single financial asset. I proudly owned. Rachel reached down to the floorboard and quickly produced a sleek silver thermos. She carefully unscrewed the top, letting a thick cloud of highly aromatic steam fill the enclosed climate-controlled cabin of the luxury vehicle. Here, Thomas, she murmured affectionately, gracefully leaning over the center console to specifically hand me a small insulated travel cup. I made your special homemade herbal tea right before we left the house today. It is the exact same soothing recipe I used to make for Martha whenever she was feeling completely overwhelmed and deeply anxious. It will deeply help calm your frayed nerves and quickly clear away that nasty mental confusion you have been fiercely dealing with lately. Drink it all up right now while it is still nice and hot. I carefully took the warm cup from her perfectly steady hand. My own fingers were actively shaking, and for once the violent physical tremor was absolutely not an act. It was pure, unadulterated, sickening revulsion. I stared directly down at the dark, earthy liquid, rapidly swirling inside the small metallic cup. The highly fragrant scent of strong chamomile and fresh mint poorly masked something else darkly lurking right beneath the warm surface. Something subtle, unnervingly heavy, and distinctly metallic. You should really drink it, Dad, Derek firmly urged without taking his calculating eyes off the busy road ahead. Rachel spent all morning carefully preparing it just for you. It really helps incredibly with your cognitive stability. You know you desperately need it right now. I slowly brought the thin rim of the hot cup to my dry lips entirely, pretending to take a slow, highly hesitant sip, but I kept my mouth tightly and securely sealed shut. As Derek aggressively navigated a sharp, unexpected turn through the incredibly busy downtown intersection, he cursed loudly at a passing commercial delivery truck, becoming completely and totally distracted by the heavy shifting traffic. Seizing the perfect fleeting moment, I deliberately and forcefully jolted my right wrist. A generous, heavy splash of the scalding hot herbal tea spilled directly over the edge of the travel cup and landed squarely onto the heavy-duty synthetic floor mat, strategically positioned right beneath my expensive leather shoes. I immediately looked down at the dark, steaming puddle. Almost instantly, a faint, undeniable chemical sizzle echoed softly in the quiet, enclosed footwell of the luxury vehicle. The highly resilient synthetic rubber of the expensive protective mat began to severely and visibly discolor rapidly, turning a sickly, deeply pale yellow, exactly where the toxic liquid had directly pulled. The horrifying, undeniable realization violently struck me like a massive physical blow directly to the chest. My beautiful, fiercely intelligent wife did not suddenly die of natural, completely unavoidable causes. Her fatal sudden heart attack was directly preceded by 5 agonizing months of extreme neurological decline, severe, unexplainable joint pain, and profound crippling mental fog. Physical symptoms that perfectly mirrored exactly what I had been actively experiencing for the past 5 consecutive months. Symptoms they conveniently and repeatedly blamed on my advancing old age and my intense blinding grief. I was absolutely not losing my sharp analytical mind. I was absolutely not dying of a broken heart. I was being meticulously, deliberately, and systematically poisoned by them. The rest of the car ride passed in a suffocating blur. I kept my breathing shallow, my mind running complex structural calculations to stop my hands from reaching across the center console and wrapping around my son's throat. They were murdering me slowly, methodically, just like Martha. Every sip of that bitter tea, every gentle touch on my shoulder, was a calculated step in my own execution. Derek steered the heavy vehicle into a dilapidated commercial plaza on the edge of the financial district. I looked up at the squat, weathered brick structure, sandwiched between a failing dry cleaner and a discount liquor store. The faded gold lettering on the glass door read Maxwell and Associates Legal Counsel. This was absolutely not the pristine downtown high-rise where my trusted estate attorney, Gregory Barnes, operated. Gregory had managed my family trust for 3 decades. He was a shark in a tailored suit who scrutinized every single comma. Derek knew Gregory would never allow a transfer of power without a brutal interrogation. So my son bypassed the family lawyer and found a bottom-feeding opportunist for a quick fee. I stumbled slightly as I got out, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Rachel was instantly at my side, gripping my elbow. We walked into a cramped reception area, smelling of stale coffee. A man in a poorly fitted gray suit waited behind a cluttered desk, offering a slick, greasy smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," the lawyer said, extending a clammy hand. "I am Richard Maxwell. Derek has told me so much about you. We just have a few standard documents to execute today to relieve your heavy administrative burdens." I nodded slowly, offering a trembling handshake. They guided me into a small conference room. Derek pulled out a chair, pressing his hands firmly onto my shoulders as I sat down. Maxwell slid a thick stack of stapled documents across the scarred wooden table. "This is a durable power of attorney," Maxwell explained, tapping a cheap plastic pen against the signature line. "It grants your son the immediate legal authority to consolidate your bank accounts, liquidate stock assets, and manage all ongoing medical or tax liabilities. Given your declining health, this ensures your vast estate remains fully protected." I stared down at the dense legal jargon. It was an absolute death warrant. The second I signed my name, Derek could digitally wire my entire $40 million life savings to any offshore account he desired. He could drain my retirement, leaving me destitute before the poison finished its grim work. I reached out with a trembling hand, allowing my fingers to hover uncertainly over the pen. Derek leaned in close, his breathing shallow with suppressed anticipation. "Just sign right there at the bottom, Dad," he urged softly, right next to the blue sticker. I picked up the pen, the tip touched the paper, and then I let out a violent rattling cough. I doubled over in the chair, hacking uncontrollably, pressing my forearm against my mouth. I let the pen slip from my fingers, watching it clatter onto the floor. Rachel quickly handed me a paper napkin, her face a mask of manufactured concern. I wheezed heavily, playing the role of a deeply exhausted, fading old man, perfectly to the hilt. "I am so sorry," I whispered, rubbing my chest. "My chest is just so tight today." I looked down at the documents, narrowing my eyes as if the text was blurry. "Derek, I cannot read a single word of this. I must have left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter back home." Maxwell frowned, looking nervously at my son. "You do not strictly need to read the fine print, Mr. Caldwell. I have fully summarized the broad strokes for you. It is entirely standard boilerplate text." I shook my head stubbornly, pushing the thick stack of papers away with a clumsy motion. "No," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. "Martha always told me never to sign anything I could not read with my own two eyes. I will take these home with me. I will read them over the long weekend when my head is clearer. We can come back next week." The sudden, deafening silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked up, letting my vacant gaze wander over to my son. Derek was staring directly at me, and for one terrifying fraction of a second, his carefully crafted mask completely slipped. The veins in his neck bulged, his jaw clenched with such pure, unadulterated rage that I could actually hear his teeth grinding together. He looked at me like a trapped animal, actively ruining a highly lucrative slaughter. He wanted to physically grab my hand and force the pen across the paper. "Dad." Derek started, his voice tight and dangerously low. "We really need to get this finalized today. The tax deadlines are aggressively approaching." Before he could snap, Rachel stepped smoothly in front of him, placing a restraining hand firmly on his chest. She flashed me that sickening patient smile entirely devoid of actual warmth. "When, of course," Thomas Rachel cooped gently, gathering the papers and sliding them neatly into a manila folder. "You should absolutely take your time. There is no rush at all. We want you to feel completely comfortable with everything. Derek is just a little stressed about the looming hospital bills. That is all." Derek swallowed his visible fury, forcing a stiff, awkward nod. "Yeah, right. Sorry, Dad. Take the weekend. We will review it all together on Monday." They drove me back to my sprawling empty house in near total silence. The tension radiating from the front seats was absolutely palpable. I clutched the manila folder tightly to my chest, a physical shield against their quiet, deadly desperation. Every passing mile confirmed my grim reality. The clock was ticking. They needed this money immediately, and my stubborn refusal to sign had just massively accelerated their lethal timeline. When we finally pulled into my long, sweeping driveway, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to me with an unwavering, deeply concerning smile. "Thomas, I'm actually going to stay the night in the guest room here," she announced smoothly. "You had such a terrible coughing fit in that office, and you seem so incredibly frail today. I really want to cook you a hot, nutritious dinner and make absolutely sure you are properly cared for tonight. I would never forgive myself if you fell or had a sudden medical emergency while you were all alone." My stomach twisted violently. She was not staying to care for me. She was staying to monitor me. She was staying to ensure I ingested my daily lethal dose of whatever toxic cocktail she was slowly feeding me. "That is very kind of you, Rachel," I whispered weakly, letting her help me out of the SUV. Later that evening, after a quiet, heavily supervised dinner, I retreated to my private study. I sat in my large leather armchair, staring blankly at the dark mahogany desk. Rachel knocked softly and entered, carrying a small silver tray. On it rested a steaming mug of her special herbal tea and a small, unmarked white pill. "Derek spoke to your doctor this afternoon, Thomas." She lied, effortlessly handing me the pill. "He prescribed a new, highly concentrated vitamin supplement to help strengthen your heart and clear up that nasty brain fog. You need to swallow it right now and drink every last drop of your tea so you can get a long, deep sleep." I looked at the pill resting in my palm. It was completely smooth, devoid of any pharmaceutical markings, a silent, untraceable weapon. I gave her a weak, grateful nod, bringing my hand to my mouth. I tossed the pill backward, but expertly tucked it deep under my tongue. I picked up a glass of water from the desk and took a large, convincing swallow. "There," I said, managing a tired, raspy sigh. "All gone," Rachel smiled, her eyes tracking the mug of steaming tea. "Drink up," she urged softly. "I will be right outside in the hallway if you need absolutely anything at all." She turned her back and slowly walked out of the study, pulling the heavy wooden door partially shut, leaving a small crack so she could listen. The moment her footsteps faded slightly down the hall, I acted with swift, silent precision. I spit the dissolved bitter pill into a thick paper napkin and shoved it deep into my trouser pocket. I grabbed the hot mug of toxic tea and moved quietly across the thick Persian rug toward the door. Just outside the study, sitting elegantly in the long shadowed corridor, was a massive decorative potted fern. I leaned carefully through the small gap in the doorway, ensuring Rachel was completely out of sight in the distant kitchen. With a steady, deliberate motion, I poured the entire contents of the steaming mug directly into the deep soil of the large potted fern. The dark liquid quickly vanished into the dirt. I carefully wiped the rim of the ceramic mug, walked slowly back to my desk, and sat down in the absolute silence, now fully prepared to wage a devastating war. I opened my eyes to the pale morning light, filtering through the heavy bedroom curtains. For the first time in 5 agonizing months, the world around me did not spin into a dizzying, nauseating blur the moment I lifted my head from the pillow. I lay perfectly still on the mattress, taking a slow, deep breath, mentally inventorying every single joint and muscle in my aging body, the persistent crippling ache in my knees, the heavy stiffness in my shoulders, and that suffocating mental fog that had relentlessly clouded my daily thoughts were noticeably receding. It was not a complete miraculous recovery, but the sudden absence of that oppressive physical weight was absolutely undeniable. Skipping just one single dose of Rachel's special homemade herbal tea had been enough to grant my body a desperate moment of genuine clarity. I slowly sat up on the edge of the bed, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. My legs did not violently tremble. My hands, when I held them out in front of me, were completely steady. The horrifying reality of my situation washed over me again, cold and sharp. Everything I had been feeling, the weakness, the confusion, the sudden inability to remember simple daily tasks. It was all a meticulously engineered illusion. They were intentionally breaking down my physical structure, dismantling my health day by day, microgram by microgram, ensuring that my inevitable collapse would look like nothing more than the tragic natural decline of a grieving, heartbroken old man. They had done the exact same thing to Martha. They had watched her slowly fade, offering fake smiles and poisoned cups of tea, until her heart finally gave out. I stood up, my spine straightening with a renewed, dangerous sense of purpose. I dressed quietly, choosing a simple pair of slacks and a comfortable sweater, maintaining the visual illusion of a vulnerable, defeated senior citizen. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out into the long, quiet hallway leading toward the main living area. The house was silent, save for the faint, muffled sounds of conversation drifting up from the kitchen downstairs. As I walked down the corridor, I paused right outside the door of my private study. My eyes fell on the massive decorative potted fern sitting in the corner. Just last night, it had been a vibrant, thriving plant with bright green fronds reaching up toward the ceiling. Now it was a terrifying monument to my son's absolute treachery. The entire plant was completely dead. The lush, healthy leaves had withered into dry, brittle husks. The stems were violently blackened, curled inward, as if they had been scorched by an invisible chemical fire. The rich, dark soil at the base of the heavy ceramic pot was stained a sickly, unnatural yellowish hue, where I had poured the steaming contents of Rachel's mug. The sheer concentrated toxicity required to annihilate a resilient, fully grown plant in a matter of mere hours was utterly staggering. If I had swallowed that pill and drank that tea last night, I might not have woken up this morning. I might have been another tragic sudden heart attack, Another convenient tragedy for Derek and Rachel to tearfully mourn at an expensive catered funeral. I stared at the blackened dead leaves, feeling a cold, hollow void where my paternal love used to reside. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the son I had proudly watched graduate, he simply did not exist anymore. He had been entirely replaced by a ruthless, greedy predator, and I was going to treat him exactly as such. I continued down the wide staircase, carefully gripping the wooden banister, and deliberately slowing my steps to mimic a heavy, exhausted shuffle. I entered the bright, sunlit kitchen. Derek was sitting at the marble island, aggressively typing on his sleek laptop, dressed in a sharp navy suit. His expensive leather briefcase rested on the counter right next to him. Rachel was standing by the stove, cheerfully stirring a pot of oatmeal, humming a soft, pleasant melody, as if she had not just attempted to quietly murder her father-in-law 12 hours ago. "Good morning, Thomas," Rachel chirped, turning around with a blinding, practiced smile. "Did you sleep well? I was listening for you, but the house was so perfectly quiet. You must have been completely exhausted." I offered her a weak, entirely vacant nod. "I slept very deeply." "Rachel," I murmured, keeping my voice barely above a whisper, "that herbal tea you made me worked absolute wonders. I feel like I barely moved a muscle all night long." Rachel exchanged a very quick, highly satisfied glance with Derek. Derek looked up from his bright screen, offering me a stiff, completely unsympathetic smile. "Glad to hear it, Dad. We really need you resting and gathering your strength. We still have to go back to the lawyer's office on Monday to get those documents finalized. The administrative delays are getting really frustrating." Before I could formulate a pathetic, compliant response, Derek's cell phone suddenly began to buzz aggressively against the marble countertop. He glanced down at the glowing screen, and his confident, arrogant posture instantly vanished. His face went completely pale, a sheer, unadulterated panic flashing wildly in his eyes. He snatched the phone up as if it were burning his skin. "I have to take this right now." Derek stammered, his voice tight and unnaturally strained. He pushed his chair back violently, practically sprinting toward the glass patio doors leading out to the backyard. Rachel watched the stove. He stepped outside, sliding the heavy glass door tightly shut behind him, pacing frantically across the wooden deck as he pressed the phone to his ear. Rachel frowned, clearly annoyed by his sudden chaotic departure, and turned her attention back to the bubbling oatmeal on the hot stove. "Oh goodness, we are completely out of the almond milk. You like Thomas?" She sighed with exaggerated frustration. "Let me run down to the basement pantry and grab a fresh carton. I will be right back. Do not touch the hot stove." She wiped her hands on a towel and quickly headed toward the basement stairs. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me completely alone in the spacious kitchen. I looked out the glass doors. Derek was pacing furiously by the edge of the swimming pool, aggressively running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair, his face twisted in desperate, frantic conversation. He was completely distracted, utterly consumed by whatever disaster was unfolding on the other end of that phone line. I turned my gaze back to the kitchen counter. Derek's expensive combination locked leather briefcase was sitting right there, completely unguarded. My engineering background had required me to understand the intricate mechanical vulnerabilities of countless physical security systems. A standard 3-digit combination lock on a consumer-grade leather briefcase was incredibly elementary. It was a simple mechanism that relied on tiny internal tension pins. I moved with swift, silent precision, dropping the frail old man facade instantly. I stepped up to the counter and reached into my pocket, pulling out a small, sturdy metal paperclip I always carried. I quickly unbent the thick wire, creating a rigid makeshift tension tool. I slid the metal tip straight into the tiny gap beside the first numbered dial, applying firm, even pressure to the internal latch. I slowly rotated the dial with my thumb, feeling for the microscopic mechanical click that indicated the internal pin had aligned with the open groove. Click! I moved to the second dial, repeating the delicate, precise process. Click! The third dial rotated smoothly, dropping right into place with a final, satisfying snap. I pushed the brass release buttons, and the heavy leather flap of the briefcase popped open. I did not waste a single second. I bypassed the shiny marketing brochures, the thick financial portfolios, and the expensive pens digging straight into the back compartment. My fingers brushed against a thick, heavy stack of high-quality legal paper bound by a stark blue cover. I pulled it out and quickly scanned the bold, capitalized text printed across the front page. It was a highly modified, legally notarized copy of Martha Caldwell's irrevocable trust agreement. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. This was the master document, the absolute financial core of my entire $40 million estate. Gregory Barnes, my actual attorney, held the original copy securely in his firm's vault. Derek had clearly hired this new sleazy downtown lawyer to draft a series of aggressive, highly illegal amendments to the trust structure, entirely bypassing the established legal protections I had put in place decades ago. I rapidly flipped through the dense, heavy pages, scanning the complex legal jargon with the trained, meticulous eye of a man who had spent 40 years reading dense structural blueprints. I bypassed the standard asset distribution clauses and the real estate holdings, searching specifically for the newly added amendments. I found it near the very back of the massive document. A brand new heavily highlighted section that had absolutely no business being there. It was clearly marked as Section 4B Contingency of Spousal Survivorship. I dragged my finger down the page, reading the freshly printed text. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. The carefully constructed legal wording was undeniably clear, ruthlessly designed to strip away every single protective barrier my estate possessed. I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto the final devastating sentence of Section 4B. I stared down at the crisp white paper, my eyes tracing the heavy black ink of Section 4B. The dense legal terminology masked a brutally clear survivorship contingency, twisted to serve a greedy purpose. Our trust mandated that I retain control of the $40 million estate, with the remainder going to medical charities. But Derek had gutted our legacy. Section 4B stated that if I died within 6 months of Martha, the charity donations would be completely voided. The entire $40 million estate would transfer 100% directly to Derek. He knew a power of attorney could be legally challenged. He wanted permanent, unquestionable legal ownership. He needed me completely gone. I kept my hands steady against the cold granite edge of the kitchen island. I raised my eyes, looking past the modern stainless steel appliances toward the large digital calendar displayed on the wall oven panel. My mind, trained for decades to calculate precise structural loads, instantly ran the horrifying mathematics of my impending death. Martha had passed away 5 months and 2 weeks ago. The 6-month anniversary of her murder was exactly 14 days away. A wave of freezing clarity washed over me, erasing any traces of paternal denial. This was not a vague, open-ended scheme to slowly drain my accounts. This was a highly calculated, meticulously scheduled execution. Derek and Rachel were operating on a strict, unforgiving timeline. Every cup of that bitter herbal tea, every unmarked vitamin pill they shoved into my hand, was perfectly dosed to ensure my body suffered a massive catastrophic failure before that 2-week deadline expired. They needed my heart to stop before the middle of April. If I managed to survive past that 6-month mark, the original charitable clauses of the trust would permanently lock into place forever, severing Derek from the massive $40 million windfall he so desperately needed to cover his illegal offshore debts. They were watching the clock, waiting for the heavy thallium toxins to build up in my bloodstream, eagerly anticipating the moment I would finally collapse onto the hardwood floor, just like his mother did. I took a slow, deep breath, sealing my profound, blinding rage behind a thick wall of unbreakable mental discipline. I had 14 days to turn their lethal trap back onto them. 14 days to systematically dismantle my son's entire life. Suddenly, the heavy glass of the patio door rattled violently in its metal track. Heavy footsteps pounded aggressively against the wooden deck outside. Derek was coming back. His phone conversation had ended abruptly, and his silhouette was moving fast toward the kitchen entrance. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had less than 2 seconds to secure the evidence. I quickly shoved the heavy legal document back into the hidden rear compartment of the leather briefcase. I folded the marketing brochures back over the top perfectly, recreating the messy, unorganized arrangement Derek had left behind. With a swift, precise motion, I pressed the heavy leather flap down. The brass latches snapped shut with a loud, distinct click just as the glass door slid violently open. Derek stepped into the kitchen, his face flushed, and his expensive tie loosened around his neck. He practically threw his cell phone onto the dining table, radiating a highly volatile, nervous energy. His sharp eyes immediately snapped toward the kitchen island. He stopped dead in his tracks. I was standing far too close to his briefcase. My hand was hovering just inches above the polished brass locks. The tension in the room instantly spiked. The air grew incredibly thick and suffocating. Derek's posture shifted his shoulders, tensing as he took a slow, highly calculated step toward me. The mask of the loving, concerned son completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a predator protecting its vital secrets. "What are you doing?" Derek demanded. His voice was completely devoid of any warmth, flat and dangerously quiet. "Why are you hovering over my bag?" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I relied on 40 years of sitting across from aggressive, hostile contractors. I let my shoulders instantly sag, allowing a soft, vacant expression to quickly wash over my face. I brought my hand up to my forehead, rubbing my temples as if I was deeply, profoundly confused. "I was just looking for the sugar bowl, Derek," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly, making my voice sound incredibly weak and thoroughly lost. "I wanted to put some sugar in my tea. Your wife made me a nice cup of tea, but it is just so awfully bitter today. I cannot seem to remember where Martha keeps the sugar bowl anymore. Everything in this kitchen just seems to move around on me." Derek stared at me with intense, piercing scrutiny. He analyzed every single line on my face, searching for any subtle crack in my performance. He looked down at the locked briefcase, then back up at my trembling hands. I offered him a pathetic, helpless smile, blinking slowly, as if the bright kitchen lights were hurting my tired eyes. Slowly, the aggressive tension drained from his rigid posture. He bought the lie. He genuinely believed he was looking at a broken, rapidly declining old man whose brain was rotting away from grief and age. "The sugar is in the pantry, Dad," Derek said, his voice returning to that sickeningly sweet, patronizing tone. "It is right where it has always been. Why don't you go sit down in the living room? You look incredibly exhausted. I will have Rachel bring it out to you." I nodded weakly, shuffling my feet across the polished tile floor, moving with painful, exaggerated slowness toward the hallway. I kept my head down, playing the tragic role of the defeated patriarch to absolute perfection. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, the basement door swung open. Rachel stepped back into the room, holding a fresh carton of almond milk. She looked at Derek, sensing the lingering heavy tension in the air. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I paused just beyond the archway, completely out of their line of sight, but close enough to hear their hushed, secretive voices. "He was wandering around the island, looking for sugar," Derek muttered, letting out a heavy, deeply frustrated sigh. "His mind is completely gone, Rachel. He doesn't even know where he is half the time. But we are running out of time." That phone call from my boss was extremely bad. They are demanding their money by the end of the month, or they are coming for me. We cannot afford to wait for his heart to just slowly give out on its own. I heard the soft rustle of clothing as Rachel stepped closer to her husband. "I know," she whispered back, her voice utterly devoid of any human empathy. "The tea is working, but he has always been stubbornly strong. I will fix it. When I make his dinner tonight, we need to completely double the dose. We will significantly up his daily dosage, and this whole miserable problem will be completely over by the weekend." I held my breath in the shadowed hallway, pressing my back flat against the cool plaster of the wall. Derek and Rachel continued their hushed, venomous conversation in the kitchen, completely unaware their execution timeline had just been abruptly exposed. I waited until the sound of Derek's leather shoes moved toward the front door, followed closely by the clicking of Rachel's heels. I heard the rustle of coats being grabbed, and then the heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt engaged automatically, locking me inside. I was finally alone in the deafening silence of the home I had built. I stepped out of the deep shadows and walked directly to my private study. I retrieved the crumpled paper napkin from my pocket. Inside, the dissolved white pill had dried into a thick, chalky residue. Next, I walked to the devastated potted fern. I reached into the blackened foliage, snapped off several dead stems, and scooped up a handful of the yellowed soil. I placed the toxic plant matter into a sealed plastic bag alongside the napkin. My hands were perfectly steady now. The trembling weakness was gone, replaced by a cold mechanical precision. I was no longer a grieving widower. I was an engineer investigating a catastrophic failure. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I drove my modest sedan straight past the towering downtown hospitals. I needed absolute discretion. As a structural engineer, I spent my entire life dissecting catastrophic material failures, isolating the exact point where a solid beam surrendered to pressure. Now I was applying that exact same clinical methodology to my own bloodline. I navigated the vehicle toward a sleek, unmarked glass building tucked away in the affluent northern suburbs. It was a high-end private analytical laboratory that specifically catered to elite corporate clients, conducting independent chemical testing for industrial lawsuits. I walked into the pristine, sterile lobby and approached the front desk. I did not offer my name or any personal medical history. I placed the sealed bag onto the white counter and requested an immediate toxicological screening. The receptionist blinked, citing standard processing times of 3 to 5 business days. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a figure that was exactly 4 times their standard expedited fee. I told her I needed a granular molecular breakdown of every chemical compound present in both the pill residue and the soil before the sun went down today. Money removes bureaucratic friction. The receptionist called for a senior chemist, who took the samples with a serious nod. I sat in the silent waiting room for 3 agonizing hours, mentally calculating the exact trajectory of my son's magnificent deception. Finally, the heavy glass door to the secure inner laboratory clicked open. A senior analytical chemist, a man in his late 50s with incredibly tired eyes and a crisp white coat, quietly gestured for me to follow him into his office. He closed the solid door securely, making sure the electronic lock engaged with a sharp click. He sat heavily behind his modern desk and slid a thick, freshly printed diagnostic report across the smooth glass surface. The detailed paperwork was filled with complex chemical spectrum graphs and severe warning markers, indicating extreme toxicity. You requested a full molecular breakdown. The chemist began, his voice tight with professional concern. The white residue in the napkin is a highly concentrated, unregulated synthetic sedative. It is a powerful central nervous system depressant designed to cause extreme lethargy, severe cognitive confusion, and deep physical weakness. It perfectly mimics the natural symptoms of advanced dementia or rapid neurological decline in elderly patients. I nodded slowly, my jaw clenched tight. "And the soil sample?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The chemist took a deep breath, looking at me with a mixture of profound pity and absolute alarm. "The soil is completely saturated with a heavy metal compound known as thallium," he stated grimly. "It is tasteless, completely odorless, and incredibly lethal, even in microscopic doses. Historically, it is darkly known as the poisoner's poison because it is nearly impossible to detect in a standard blood panel without ordering a specific highly targeted screening. It aggressively attacks the central nervous system and cardiovascular muscles. Over time, a slow accumulation of thallium will cause severe joint pain, profound mental fog, and eventually a sudden, utterly catastrophic cardiac arrest. It leaves almost no visible trace during a standard hospital autopsy. The victim simply appears to have suffered a fatal heart attack. The quiet, sterile walls of the laboratory seemed to close in around me as the horrific, unvarnished truth finally settled deep into my bones. The puzzle was complete. Every single agonizing symptom I had experienced over the last 5 months. The debilitating exhaustion, the terrifying memory lapses, the days I could barely walk down my own staircase. It was all artificially induced. Derek and Rachel had been feeding me a calculated daily cocktail of sedatives to mask the lethal, slow-acting heavy metal actively destroying my cardiovascular system. The darkest, most devastating realization of my entire life struck me. Martha, my beautiful, vibrant, loving wife, did not die of a sudden, unavoidable medical tragedy. She had experienced the exact same severe joint pain. She had suffered the exact same frightening mental fog. They had systematically poisoned her, watching her slowly deteriorate, serving her toxic cups of herbal tea with bright, loving smiles, until her heart finally gave out under the immense strain. They murdered the woman I loved more than life itself, just to trigger the financial contingencies of a massive legal trust. And now, operating on a strict 2-week deadline, they were preparing to significantly double my dosage to finish the job and claim their bloody inheritance. The chemist leaned forward, breaking the heavy silence. "Sir," he said urgently, "this is a matter of severe criminal poisoning. I am legally obligated to advise you to contact the police immediately. We need to hand this report directly over to law enforcement." I looked down at the chemical graphs, a cold, dark abyss opening up inside my soul. If I called the local police right now, Derek and Rachel would simply be arrested in their beautiful home. They would immediately hire expensive defense attorneys, drag the painful process out through endless, exhausting legal appeals, and sit safely protected in a warm, heavily guarded jail cell. They would eat 3 meals a day and sleep soundly. That was absolutely not good enough. An arrest was far too clean, far too merciful for the monsters who tortured and murdered my wife. I looked up at the visibly shaken chemist, my eyes completely devoid of any remaining human warmth, paternal love, or basic mercy. "No," I whispered to the man folding the thick toxicology report and securely sliding it into my inner jacket pocket. "The police will absolutely not be necessary for me here today. I do not want my son to just quietly go to jail. I want to systematically obliterate his entire world and utterly destroy the two of them once and for all." I walked out of the private laboratory into the fading afternoon light, carrying the thick toxicology report inside my jacket like a loaded weapon. My profound grief had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold structural resolve. I drove my vehicle to a secure public payphone outside a decaying commercial strip mall on the desolate outskirts of the city, ensuring there was absolutely no digital trace of my communication. I dialed a private, strictly unlisted number I had memorized 3 decades ago. The line rang exactly twice before a gruff, deeply familiar voice answered the secure call with heavy suspicion. Gregory Barnes was not just my estate attorney. He was a ruthless, brilliant legal shark who had built his formidable reputation by utterly destroying anyone who attempted to cheat his wealthy clients. If I told him I needed an immediate, completely clandestine meeting, strictly off the books, far away from his corporate downtown office, I told him my own son was actively trying to murder me. Gregory did not ask a single clarifying question. He simply gave me a specific address for a private, highly secure warehouse on the industrial side of the river and told me to drive there today. But I arrived at the sprawling corrugated metal building. As the heavy autumn rain began to fall, Gregory was waiting inside a stark, harshly lit office space, constructed of reinforced glass and steel within the massive empty warehouse. He wore a tailored black suit, his sharp, predatory eyes taking in my disheveled appearance as I walked through the door. I did not waste any time with pleasantries or emotional outbursts. I sat down at the cold steel table and placed the expedited toxicology report directly in front of him. Next to it, I placed several high-resolution photographs I captured earlier. These were the photographs of the forged power of attorney documents Derek had attempted to force upon me at that sleazy strip mall law firm. Gregory put on his reading glasses and opened the laboratory file. I watched his rigid jaw tighten as he cleared his throat, read the complex chemical breakdown, his eyes scanning the terrifying paragraphs, detailing the heavy sedatives and the lethal concentration of thallium. I watched him meticulously examine the photographs of the counterfeit trust amendments, specifically noting the fraudulent contingency clause designed to legally bypass the charitable donations and grant Derek complete unrestricted access to the massive estate. Gregory closed the file with a sharp, resounding snap. His face was a mask of cold professional fury. He had managed Martha's legal affairs for 30 long years. He considered us close personal friends. The sudden realization that my son had systematically poisoned her for immense financial gain ignited a terrifying quiet wrath within the seasoned attorney. "We are absolutely not going to the police with this," Gregory stated, his voice completely devoid of any basic human emotion. "If we hand this specific evidence to the authorities right now, your son will immediately hire a massive aggressive defense team today. They will loudly claim you are suffering from severe dementia, just as they have been heavily documenting for the past 5 months. They will argue the laboratory results are entirely circumstantial, or that you somehow accidentally poisoned yourself due to your rapid mental decline. Derek will easily drag this through the criminal court system for a decade while sitting comfortably on bail." I nodded slowly, completely agreeing with his ruthless, accurate assessment. I told Gregory I wanted to dismantle Derek entirely, meticulously, stripping him of his fake prestige, his stolen wealth, and his freedom, leaving him with absolutely nothing forever. Gregory pulled a secure encrypted laptop from his leather briefcase and began typing with furious mechanical precision. He told me he was bringing his elite team of forensic accountants online immediately. If Derek was taking such astronomical, desperate risks to illegally acquire $40 million within a strict 2-week window, there was a massive bleeding hole in his personal finances that urgently needed to be found. I sat in the sterile warehouse office for the next 4 grueling hours, listening to the relentless clicking of Gregory's keyboard and his hushed, intense phone calls with his brilliant financial investigators. Tonight, Gregory's team had unrestricted backdoor access to global banking networks, hidden offshore registries, and highly encrypted financial databases. They were digital hunters, relentlessly tracking the invisible, convoluted flow of capital across international borders. I watched the cold rain violently lash against the high warehouse windows, my mind completely focused on the impending total destruction of the man I once proudly called my son. Derek had always projected the flawless, perfect image of a highly successful, invincible investment banker. He wore custom, expensive suits, drove sleek luxury imported vehicles, and frequently bragged about his massive, unbeatable stock portfolios without any hesitation. But as the clock slowly ticked past midnight, Gregory finally pushed his glowing laptop away from the center of the table. He took off his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a deep, incredibly heavy sigh. The profound truth he had uncovered was not just shocking, it was utterly pathetic. "Your son is a complete, absolute fraud," Thomas Gregory said quietly, turning the laptop screen so I could clearly see the cascading columns of red numbers. "The highly successful investment banker image is nothing but a hollow, desperately constructed facade engineered to completely deceive everyone around him. He does not have a massive, thriving stock portfolio. He does not even legally own that sprawling luxury estate he currently lives in with Rachel. The massive house is heavily mortgaged to the absolute breaking point, and he has secretly taken out 4 separate, highly illegal secondary loans against the sprawling property using completely falsified corporate income statements." I stared silently at the catastrophic financial ruin displayed prominently on the glowing screen. Gregory carefully tapped a specific folder on the digital dashboard, opening a series of highly complex, heavily encrypted transaction logs, detailing 3 years of massive financial abuse everywhere. "Derek is a severe, Utterly degenerate gambling addict, Gregory continued, his stern tone, dripping with absolute unfiltered disgust. Over the past 3 long years, he has completely liquidated his entire legitimate savings to recklessly fund massive, highly volatile cryptocurrency speculations and illegal offshore sports betting syndicates. When the global crypto markets suddenly crashed and his incredibly aggressive bets failed miserably, he began aggressively borrowing heavily on high margin to desperately cover his enormous, rapidly mounting losses. According to the exhaustive forensic audit, Derek is currently drowning in exactly $15 million of unsecured, totally illegal offshore gambling debt right now. I silently absorbed the staggering number, $15 million. Gregory leaned forward over the steel table, his professional expression turning incredibly dark and fiercely grim. "It gets infinitely worse," Thomas, the veteran attorney, warned, pulling up a highly classified file. His expert team had just successfully intercepted from a secure dark web communication server. The massive money Derek illegally borrowed came directly from a highly violent, extremely ruthless underground criminal syndicate. Intercepted messages confirm they are actively threatening to brutally murder Derek. He is murdering his parents to steal $40 million strictly to save his own miserable skin today. The revelation hung in the cold, sterile air of the industrial warehouse like a physical weight. We owe $15 million in debt to men who did not send polite collection letters or negotiate payment plans. My son was not just a greedy, entitled opportunist seeking an early inheritance. He was a cornered, desperate animal, actively drowning in a violent criminal underworld, willing to systematically slaughter his own parents to buy his survival. I looked across the steel table at Gregory. The veteran attorney's face was carved from absolute granite. He slowly closed the classified financial file on his encrypted laptop, steepled his fingers, and waited in absolute silence for my directive. I told him we were not going to wait for Derek to attempt another clumsy legal maneuver or draft another forged document. We were going to hand my son exactly what he desperately wanted, but we were going to lace it with invisible federal razor wire. Gregory's lips curled into a sharp, terrifying smile, and he immediately pulled his laptop back open, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We spent the next 3 grueling hours constructing a brilliant, devastating financial snare.